For the past decade, AAA games have been on a strange and somewhat concerning trajectory. Gone are the days of AAA games being the future, pushing the boundaries of games and what is possible in the medium. Nowadays, almost every AAA game is created not to explore the medium and experiment trying to find the next thing to propel the industry forward, but rather to find out the best ways to push out a new, barely functioning product, barely hanging on by the threads of FOMO and artificial replayability. Now, obviously, making games for profit is nothing new, but it felt like there used to be an urgency in the industry to prove they could make the best game. And sure, in some cases this led to awful crunch and working conditions, which sadly still happens on a regular basis, but on a wider scale it seemed like developers at least had the tools to make something special rather than a lack of tools to make something mediocre, and usually carried by IP legacy. This urgency, this desire to make the next best game would lead to those profits. Games like Halo 3, Skyrim, Uncharted 2, or even something like Modern Warfare 2, a game that is probably a catalyst for some of the worst design trends in current AAA development, are all great games that clearly had a lot of inspiration and passion behind them. All of this is to say, Gears of War 3, especially with how things are going these days, seems like an impossible game to create on paper. Gears 3 is not only easily the best feeling, best looking, and best sounding in the original trilogy, but it is absolutely packed with content, and all the content is somehow good. The campaign on a beat-to-beat basis easily has the best gameplay and combat encounters and never loses steam. Versus has a whole host of game modes and weapons to use, creating some incredibly dynamic moments that, even with my own opinions on its balance aside, are probably the wildest and straight-up coolest of the series. Shoutouts to the Moza staff, that's my GOAT! Horde mode is expanded in multiple ways with just the right amount of features to keep the mode exciting and varied while not being too bogged down by extraneous and tedious systems. Beast mode, while certainly the most lean of the modes, is still immaculately made. How every Locust enemy plays in an interesting and fun way without feeling super janky or unfinished still blows my mind to this day. On top of all this, you also get arcade modifiers for campaign or horde shenanigans, a ton of medals and unlocks to work towards, and great presentation to make everything easily parsable and user-friendly. Even with production budgets for games increasing more and more over the years, very few games can even contend with the sheer level of production value on display with Gears of War 3. Now, I should be clear, there are still some AAA games that do have insane production value and do push the envelope. Certain flagship Nintendo titles like Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey certainly still show how much creativity there is to exploring games. From Software has come out with an incredibly consistent and groundbreaking lineup of epic adventures throughout their Souls-like games such as Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, and Elden Ring. Rockstar's Red Dead Redemption 2, Naughty Dog's The Last of Us 2 story quality controversy aside, and after many grueling years of fixing the game, CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk 2077. But aside from a few studios that seem to still want to make the next great game, every other studio is concerned with one thing, making a game that can sustain absurd and greedy monetization practices, and the worst part is that it works. There are certainly games that do warrant some amount of monetization, don't get me wrong. Free-to-play games are literally designed on the conceit that you get a whole game for free and that the players buying in-game items will be able to support continued development on the product. Larger subscription-based games like MMOs definitely need funds to keep servers up considering how much information has to be stored on them. But at the end of the day, there are much better and fairer ways that games could be monetized. A character skin that I barely even own for a game that could just be shut down someday should not cost me a third of a fully priced retail game. I'll be honest though, free-to-play games aren't even really the target of this conversation anyways. For that, let's take a look at truly the worst offenders of these trends, fully priced retail releases that also have free-to-play-esque monetization models installed into them. Now, this would be a convenient time to dunk on some of the classic offenders, games like Battlefront 2, but let's take a look at some games in a genre that these days I enjoy greatly, fighting games. Modern fighting games might truly have some of the worst monetization I've seen in modern games. Even with a game as tightly developed and thought out as Street Fighter 6, the game is looking to nickel and dime you for every little thing that you can customize about the game. Want a new character skin? $6. Want a funny little picture that appears when a match is found for about 3 seconds? $2. Want music to replace the overall mediocre Street Fighter 6 OST? $2 to $3. Want fucking palette swaps for your character? $2 to $3. And this isn't even including the fact that for the DLC characters you are shelling out $30 or $50 if you want them to come with extra outfits in the stages. Like you're basically buying Street Fighter 6 twice for the Ultimate Pass, or by the time Season 2 DLC is out you have actually bought the game twice. Also, fun fact, but in order to get a $6 character skin, as mentioned earlier, you would have to buy the $12 in-game currency bundle since you can't just buy exact amounts. Very awesome and consumer friendly. These absurd prices are pretty hard to justify when, other than the DLC updates that you have to pay for anyways, the games as a service aspects of the game are so minimal and bare bones that trying to justify the microtransaction money is going towards continued development on the game is honestly laughable. Really, the microtransaction money is going towards making more silly bullshit for you to spend more money on. Plus, the base package of the game really is just multiplayer, since World Tour is an incredibly skeletal and thin experience. These issues also plague the other big fighting game franchises such as Mortal Kombat 1 and Tekken 8, and it is just unfortunate to see that these franchises continue to find new ways to become more and more obtuse when it comes to monetization models and pricing. So in short, a lot of modern AAA games are playing it safe while also playing it greedy. The current landscape for games as art in the AAA space is a bit of a mess, and the games that are purely made for entertainment are generally lacking in features. This is all to say I really don't know how a game like Gears of War 3 ever got made. Gears of War 3 is a massive game. A game with so many features and things to do that the fact they also fit so much detail into every corner is just an insane feat. The campaign is great, featuring 4-player co-op for the first and maybe last time in the Gears franchise, with a whole host of crazy enemy types, locales, weapons, and set pieces. The game also looks gorgeous, plays the smoothest it ever has, and continues to have an engaging and memorable story to dive into. There are also a bunch of collectibles to get and Easter eggs to find that there is a lot to do for those that want to explore more and truly complete the campaign. On top of all that, you can use the variety of interesting and sometimes hilarious arcade modifiers to experience the campaign in a variety of different ways. The campaign is such a meaty experience that, to be quite honest, if compared against shooters that have campaigns with a similar length and games that are mostly just played for the campaign, it is on the same level of quality. So for campaign alone, you more or less already have a fully priced retail game's worth of content. But of course, Gears 3 still has so much more on offer. Naturally, it would be nice to use all those skills built up in campaign and other modes, and the easiest transition naturally would be Horde mode. Horde mode is one of the classic wave-based survival modes where each wave has a certain amount of enemies to defeat before moving on to the next wave, with each wave getting harder and harder as you progress. Now, Epic Games honestly could have just stopped there, basic wave survival mode similar to Gears 2 Horde, but improved with new maps and enemies in Gears 3. But they didn't. In fact, they added a whole assortment of new mechanics to Horde to really solidify it as a cohesive and endlessly replayable mode. Buildable structures that level up the more they are built to unlock upgraded versions, boss rounds each 10th wave that have special enemies, challenge rounds that provide extra loot if certain conditions are met, and, like campaign, arcade modifiers to spice up the experience. It truly is a fully fleshed out experience that could easily have hundreds of hours sunk into it. With just campaign and Horde, we have reached what I would consider equal to or more than a fully priced retail game's worth of content, but of course there is still more. Every Gears of War player loves the Locust. The enemies you fight are just as important as the characters you play and the weapons you use, and the Locust are probably one of the most well-explored enemy factions in any shooter I've played. Throughout the series, we've seen so many types of Locust units with different permutations that affect combat encounters in different ways, and it makes almost all of the Locust incredibly memorable. So Epic realized, hey, maybe we should let the players play as more of the Locusts instead of just the ones that are friendly to normal multiplayer. This is where Beast Mode comes in. Now, admittedly, Beast Mode is certainly more lean than the other modes in this game, but the ability to just play as so many different types of Locust makes this mode a good change of pace occasionally between all of the campaign, Horde, and versus play. And through some miracle of science and programming, all of the Locusts actually feel good and different to play. Whether it be lumbering around as a butcher, sprinting to your own explosive death as a ticker, or becoming the rampaging and near invincible monster that is the Berserker, Beast Mode is both novel in the experience it provides, and the fact that everything works so well in it. Even going back to play it to get footage of it put a smile on my face. It is a shame that this mode got completely left in the past, because similar to the original appearance of Horde in Gears 2, Beast Mode shows so much potential with an already great start. Finally, we of course have to talk about Versus, which is probably the real reason people stick with the Gears of War franchise at the die-hard level that they do. Now, Versus alone would qualify as a free-to-play game these days, well, in some cases sadly a $70 game. But of course, it is bundled in with the rest of the modes discussed so far, which makes its inclusion even more impressive. Versus includes a whole array of modes that lead to different gameplay experiences. Team Deathmatch, Warzone, Execution, Capture the Leader, King of the Hill, and Wingman all lead to very different gameplay. Plus, on top of those modes, there would be different event modes and modified versions of these modes. Basically, there are always options to switch things up and keep the multiplayer experience fresh. There were even more options that could be explored with custom matches as well, so there was always an option for whatever mood you were in. A lot of the maps also got the shine in verses where you really got to feel what they were designed for. Although not all maps are created equal, but that is a discussion for another day. Looking at you, Sandbar. Yet again, another mode you could dump hundreds, if not thousands of hours into. Trust me, I've done it. Even DLC was impressive for this game. Of course, it did have some DLC that was simply map packs, but even the map packs were put well together. But then you also had stuff like Ram's Shadow, which was its own mini-campaign with both standard COG gameplay and new Locust gameplay where you could play as new unique Locust enemies and of course Ram. This DLC also came with maps too, so it truly was a bargain. Now sure, the Season Pass for Gears 3 was $30, which is half the price of the base game, but this Season Pass included all of the map packs, including Ram's Shadow. Plus, these map packs also included character skins, weapon skin sets, new fortifications for Horde Beast Mode, and the much requested returning Guardian game mode. The funny thing is, back then I remember being somewhat critical of how the DLC was handled, in terms of on this DLC, Season Pass not necessarily guaranteeing what specifically would be added in the future, and a $30 pricing seemed somewhat pricey back then for unknown content, and most importantly, weapon skins. However, I never realized how bad things would get. Not only do some skins in fully priced retail games cost as much as Ram's Shadow did by itself, but the old weapon skin packs cost within $3 to $4, which nowadays would probably run you $10 minimum in most games. And then the $10 would probably get you one skin for one gun instead of a pack of skins for multiple guns. It truly is insane to see just how much prices have gone up for everything in games while also seeing general game quality go down exponentially. Gears 3 in hindsight was truly a special game that, in a myriad of ways, was the gold standard of what a AAA game should be. So this begs the question, can any modern blockbuster game reach the levels of something like Gears of War 3? Well, yes, although I do think it is becoming exceedingly rare for a game to reach the bang for your buck that Gears 3 did. Now, quick disclaimer, obviously the value someone finds in the game is incredibly subjective, and I think a game having to justify its price tag just through sheer amount of content shouldn't apply to all games, but clearly games that are made as a product primarily should be rated on how much value you can get out of the game per dollar. As an example, I think Sekiro being $60 is totally cool even if it is a short game because it is an unforgettable experience and an absolute work of art. But something like Street Fighter 6, which is basically a single multiplayer mode with some bare bones alternate modes tacked on, that also has awful microtransactions, probably shouldn't have even been a fully priced game to begin with. Hell, with how much money you have to spend on season passes or costumes, it should have been free to play. Speaking of free-to-play, I do think free-to-play has a lot of strong benefits such as lowering the barrier of entry to get players into games and also allowing games to focus on more specific experiences, in most cases multiplayer, but it has led to an era of stagnation in terms of innovation and actual new experiences. There are so many free-to-play games that are either Battle Royale, MOBA, or Hero Shooter that if you want to experience something new, you are out of luck. Plus, most of these games have such small differences that without being incredibly deep into the genres, you wouldn't even notice them. Sadly, any games that have had innovative gameplay or ideas usually end up being dead on arrival, such as Rumbleverse. The only weird games that survived, I think, are Rocket League and Fall Guys, but those games started as paid games, so I'm not sure if that fully counts or not. This general stagnation also tends to have negative effects on non-free-to-play as well, since games like Rocket Arena and Knockout City were incredibly unique and fun, but people didn't want unique and fun. Also, as a bigger example, while the series definitely still survives off of name alone, Call of Duty still regularly releases games that are marginally different, that they make millions off of, but knowing the market will accept the bare minimum, I guess it is the smart play at the end of the day. Crazy that people spend $60 on a game that most players probably won't even touch the campaign for just to play more multiplayer of a game that is probably worse than like 4 or more previous entries in the franchise. Now don't get me wrong, you can definitely reuse concepts and assets for games, but there are smart ways to do it. Games like Yakuza or Dark Souls and Elden Ring know that reusing assets can be an efficient way to save time in places that allows for them to more easily create new and exciting stuff. But stuff like Call of Duty or Pokemon very rarely do interesting things with their iterative formulas, and it is pretty disappointing considering both franchises were innovators at some point in time. This actually relates to what I'm specifically trying to point out with Gears of War 3. Gears of War 3 as a game isn't insanely different from the previous two games, but it does change up a lot of stuff and adds a lot of genuinely fresh ideas. Like, yes, at the end of the day, they are all third-person cover shooters, but they play so differently and have such wildly different feels and tones between them that you can just see the effort. Whereas the effort in a lot of long-running franchises these days seem to be either absent or purposely stifled by publishers or developers that want to play it safe. Frankly, AAA games overall are playing it too safe these days, and the risk takers are far and few in between. So what the hell am I even ranting about at the end of the day? While I could do an incredibly in-depth and analytical breakdown of the phenomenon that I have spoken about throughout this video, I am much more interested in talking about the general feeling and state of the AAA games industry, as I think it says a lot about where we are and where we are heading. Big games are becoming more and more risk-adverse as time moves on, which also means that games will continue to be developed as smaller and less cohesive experiences over time, and eventually all we will have left is free-to-play, or maybe even exorbitantly priced, slop. I just think that Gears of War 3 at the time seemed like the coolest game ever to me, so much to do, and it was all super fresh and fun to experience. Plus, the game actually worked on launch, which is another issue I didn't even have time to get into with this video. I just simply think that, for the most part, artistry has been absent from the majority of AAA releases. Games very rarely feel like they're trying to be the next leap in the industry anymore, and, to be honest, it's a shame. Well, at least in the AAA industry. Luckily, indie games still regularly cook up fresh and fun experiences full of passion and a love for the art form. So basically this video, in summary, was a disguised way to just tell people to play indie games. Also, I fucking love Gears of War 3. Peace.